My name is Susanne Cockrell. I'm a professor of fine art at CCA, and we are gathering today for a talk by Matthew Spellberg, who is, I understand, originally from the Bay Area and is zooming in today from Sitka, Alaska. This talk is in conjunction with my critical ethnic studies seminar, Social Dreaming and the Dream. California College of the Arts is located in Yelamu, also known as San Francisco, on the unceded territories of the Ramaytush peoples, who have lived here long before us, and we are visitors to this land and are learning to orient ourselves to this position as we build meaningful relationships with the communities we live among. I was introduced to Matthew's writing and scholarship in 2020 when I read his article on dream sharing and its purpose in Cabinet magazine. Reading it felt like a balm and a call to action, and launched me into research on dream sharing as a social and public practice. As an educator, one of the best ways to research is to build a class and a working group. And with 18 wonderful students this spring, we are exploring dream sharing practices as a tool for creative practice, communal dialogue, and reflection. The theme this year for Creative Citizens in Action is belonging. And I thought Matthew's work might beautifully approach this theme through his scholarship on the long history and possible future of dream sharing and the communal imagination, including ways dreams have been negotiated and enlivened to become part of waking and public life. Matthew Spellberg is Dean of Outer Coast, an experimental institution of higher education in Sitka, Alaska. His scholarly research concerns the history of dreaming across cultures, language revitalization, and oral literature, particularly in the Tlingit language. He was co-founder of the Native Cultures of America seminar at Harvard and creator of the Dream Parliament, a set of techniques for communally reimagining dreams that has been performed throughout the United States and Canada. He also serves on the planning committee for the biennial Sharing Our Knowledge Conference in Southeast Alaska. For 6 years, he taught in New Jersey prisons with the Princeton University Prison Teaching Initiative. He's an editor. He's also an educator, but he's an editor at large at Cabinet magazine and was guest editor of Cabinet issue 67 on dreams. He's been a visiting critic at the Rhode Island School of Design and a junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows. So my students and I offer you a very warm welcome, Matthew, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for such very kind words and for the invitation to come here. And I'm so delighted that a class like this is taking place and that people are studying and thinking about dreams as a social phenomenon. And I'm really thrilled to get a chance to talk to you all and share some of my own thinking on this. So as I guess most of you know, I have been working on dreams in a lot of different ways and in a number of different modalities, both scholarly and kind of more artistic or public, for basically my whole professional career. And as I understand it, many of you have seen some of the work that Suzanne was talking about on dream sharing and its purpose and so forth, which gives a little bit of a kind of broad survey or broad sweeping look at all these different traditions around the world in which and contexts around the world in which dreams have been shared. And so what I thought I would do today, given that you have that, most of you have that background, is I would really zero in on one really rich dream sharing tradition, the one that I am maybe most kind of immersed in as a student, and the one that is surrounding me here on Tlingit Aani, on the land of the Tlingit people in Southeast Alaska. And that's the Tlingit tradition and its relationship to sleep and dreams and visionary experience and how that gets translated into social life. And so what I'm going to do is take you really on kind of a deep dive into Tlingit culture, Tlingit art, Tlingit language, Tlingit ceremony, and how the dream and the life of the soul in sleep, or the life of the mind in sleep, plays a role in all of these pieces. And I guess what I would say to start with is the big takeaway, the kind of two big takeaways I want to give to you is, one, that it is really complex it's a really complex process to translate a dream into waking life. And that I think there's a common misperception that there are cultures or societies that take dreams seriously. And what happens there is people just have a dream and they're like, oh my gosh, I had a dream and I'm just going to do whatever the dream told me. And what you see, I think, around the world in societies that take dreams very seriously is incredibly complex, spectacularly complex protocols by which the power of dreams can be harnessed, can be checked, can be proofed, can be approached with a certain suspicion, can be transformed into something at once useful and powerful, but also safe and transmissible. So again, this big takeaway is just to say that when we talk about dream sharing, or when you hear about cultures that prioritize dreaming, it's not just that whatever pops into your head at night then just becomes a part of a community, but that there's a really, really complex and carefully thought out process by which a dream gets translated into waking life. And it's through that process that these dreams become so important, so meaningful, so useful. And what I'm going to do today is try to show you an example of one such process. And it sounds like you guys have read from a lot of different places other such examples, and I'd be delighted to kind of talk in the Q&A a little bit about parallels, differences, and thoughts that these things might awaken. The other sort of big takeaway is that I would say to you, I just kind of throw this out here, that there are communities that come together over the pastness of the past. There are communities, in other words, that come together over history, over the idea of a shared narrative. There are communities that come together over the presentness of the past. They come together over the feeling that they are living or reliving an experience from the past. And I would say that communities that take the dream as their key model for public life or political life are doing the latter. That what happens when people bring the dream into the center of a community is that they are imagining that the things that happened in memory are things that are now able to happen in lived experience again. And you'll see how that plays out a little bit in my talk in a moment. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into this, and I'm going to just start by sharing my screen, and really shouldn't be there. It should be over here. Where I work is Sitka, Alaska, as Susanne said, and that's right up here in this part of North America that, for the purposes of anthropology and the study of different cultures, is usually called the Northwest Coast. And that's this whole region here. And it's this rich, dense, temperate rainforest with incredible biomass, huge salmon runs, these enormous trees, this just incredibly, incredibly rich world. And it's a place with a rich, long history of a series of interconnected cultures, trading, intermarrying, warring, exchanging, entering into conflict, and building a kind of network of civilization together. And the Northwest Coast, I would say, is akin to places like Mesopotamia or ancient Greece or Western Europe or Central America, in that this is one of the great cradles of culture in the world. You've got just incredible dynamic cultural energy in the peoples and communities here, both in their differences and in the ways in which they have influenced each other. I work most particularly on the northernmost culture and language of this region, and that language and culture is called Tlingit in English, or in the language itself is Tlingit, but people usually pronounce it in English Tlingit. And it's right up here in what is the Alaska Panhandle. You can see the colonial boundary here of the US and Canada, but as you can see, those boundaries don't particularly map onto the cultural areas that define Indigenous life up here. But so I work, and by the way, Sitka is right on the outer side of this island. Sitka is a anglicization of Sitka, which means on the outer side of the island of She, which means hemlock branch. So it's like Hemlock Branch Island on the outer side of it. Sitka, and that's exactly where we are on the outer coast of that huge island, which in English is called Baranof Island. Tlingit is one of the native languages of Alaska, and this is just another map to give you a sense of the kind of geography, because this is a geography that we don't always see. This is, again, the Tlingit cultural area. Tlingit is distantly related to a very large language family in Native America called the Athabascan language family, or the Na-Dene language family. It, like I said, it's pretty distant from all of its relatives in the family, but all of these languages in red and yellow and sort of purplish are Athabascan languages, and some of the languages in the American Southwest, most notably Navajo, Dene, and Apache, are also from this language family and represent a long ago migration from up here way down to the south. So big language family, a lot of interest and focus on dreams in all the cultures that speak these languages. Couple of pictures of where we are. This actually is a picture taken in Juneau rather than in Sitka, but it's kind of illustrative. And the point I want to make with it is just to give you a sense of this dense, lush forest that is then pretty much sandwiched between the ocean and these huge, impassable mountains with a few little mountain passes that provide a pathway into the interior. But there's a saying up here that the world is as sharp as a knife, and you get that feeling in this landscape, that you're really in this narrow band of incredible ecological richness and fertility, but it's so thin, and just out of sight are these huge, huge sheets of ice and rock, and on the other side, the Pacific Ocean, which stretches all the way to Japan. Another image here, you can actually even see this is actually, believe it or not, taken from the Safeway parking lot in Juneau. But there's the Mendenhall Glacier and beyond it, the mountains that then lead to the interior, to the boreal forest. And on the other side of the mountains, the climate is much, much, much harsher. This is a much sort of a very, very mild climate given how far north we are. We get a lot of rain. We get this sort of temperate rainforest ecosystem where you have a lot of abundance and you have a lot of year-long perennial vegetal life and growth. Okay, so this talk is going to be about sleep and dreams and visions and their place in Tlingit tradition. And it's a tradition that places a lot of value on the acknowledgement of family and forebears. And I am a kind of long-term visitor in this tradition and a guest, and not myself Indigenous. So I'm going to just start my talk by saying a little bit about the tradition bearers who I work with, and you'll hear their names over the course of the talk, but I just want to list them at the beginning because it's important that you hear some names and that they just stay here with us while I'm talking about this. So I'm going to give just a brief moment of thanks to my adopted sisters, Linda Bellardi, whose Tlingit name is Situk, and Daphne Wright Koshke, my adopted aunt, whose English name is Yestuchtla, and whose English name is Colleen Bunnan, whose Tlingit name is Yestuchtla, and then some of my collaborators, Kagwask, Ishmael Hope, Shkuyet, Tim Hall, Juan Lane, Virginia Oliver, Yeditlatzin, Millie Hall, Shona Kate, Kim Perkins, Jock, Alice Taff, David Strong, who helped a lot with some of the work on this paper, the late Kinge Steed David Katsik, who was one of my most important teachers in the language, and my amazing co-teacher here in Sitka, Yedi Kuka, Dion Brady Howard, who is the great ceremonialist in Sitka and has been my teacher in all things having to do with Tlingit protocol. Let me also say that in Tlingit culture, as in a lot of cultures, talking about dreams, talking about night experiences can be sensitive to some people, though not to others. So I just want to say that I'm going to tread carefully as we walk through these ideas. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you two painted objects, which are two of the greatest masterpieces of Tlingit art. One is a box, and one is a painted screen. Both are likely from, the screen is certainly from, and the box is likely from, a village called Tlukwan, which in Tlingit is Tlakwan, which means the eternal village, and one of the great centers of Tlingit civilization. And this screen on the right side is called the rain screen, Su Chin, and it's in it belongs to the Ganachtaidi clan and was the sort of center screen in their whale house in Clackawan. And this other box is a box that is known in the literature as the final exam box, because an art historian named Wilson Duff said that if you could figure out the meanings of this box, you would figure out Northwest Coast art. It's like taking a final exam trying to study this box. It is possible that these two, we're fairly certain that the screen was painted by a painter named Shkidli Ka in the early 19th century, and it is possible that the box was painted by the same man, though we're not sure. My good friend Ishmael Hope has strong opinions on this, but there's a lot of debate about it. And it's often very hard to know these kind of facts for certain about Indigenous art, particularly from so long ago, the early 19th century. Why I wanted to show you these two things is because they represent two primal forms in Northwest Coast culture. The idea of the being or the world that is all face, that's nothing but a face, a whole screen, a flat surface. And then the other, an image of a being or a form, because really what's going on here is like a figure who's been wrapped around this box. That's all depth. That's a being that's an envelope with this huge, deep, deep, deep box at the heart of it. And I'm going to suggest to you that sleep and dreaming, and actually through them, the very idea of culture up here in Tlingit Ani, are conceptualized in these two simultaneous ways, as a being and also as this big envelope or big container for existence. So both a dream or sleep or all these things are seen as both a being that has a face that comes and visit you, that you can talk to, and also somehow this huge space. And the alternation between these two generates the process by which people come to understand dream experience. In other words, things can be all face and all surface, and yet also they can be nothing but interior and container, and they can be both of these things at once. The screen is a container, the boxes also have these beautiful surfaces. And I'm going to suggest to you that there are two poles in the sort of development of Tlingit culture, or the way, that might be too strong way, but the way Tlingit culture processes these intense experiences we associate with dreams. And that is, on the one hand, dream experience, visionary experience. And it's a little tricky, the vocabulary here, because in Tlingit especially, it's sometimes, but actually quite rarely, explicitly called a dream. And then on the other side, something called the ku'ich. And I'll talk more about that, but what it means is a feast or a party, or the word that's sometimes used in anthropological literature is the potlatch. You might have heard this term, which is the kind of central ceremonial and sacred structure gathering in Tlingit society, upon which almost everything, the Tlingit social structure, the Tlingit cosmology, really centers. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that when people go and have dream experiences and vision experiences, they plunge into this kind of deep box or envelope, is the way it's understood. When they come back from those experiences and meet their community at a feast, they take what they've learned in those deep boxes and they turn them into a face. They turn them into a surface, a mask, a form, a shape that is flat and usable. So the difference between being in the dream and talking about the dream is the difference between being in a world that's all space and then being in a world that's all about a face or a surface or a being. Okay, I realize that's kind of abstract, but I'm hoping that as I walk through some of this, it will start to make a little more sense. But just for now, think about this distinction between depths and surface, or envelope and surface, being and void. Here's just a few more images of this rain screen. I just want you to see this as a depiction of, there's some debate as to what exactly it depicts, but the spirit of the rain, and then there are all these raindrops, animate raindrop figures surrounding the larger rain figure, and inside of him is all these other little rain figures in the eyes, rain figures in the nose. And what you see here is just a depiction of Like you can imagine being in a rainstorm and being just absolutely surrounded by rain, and here that whole experience of being surrounded, deep in a rainstorm has been completely flattened. It's been completely brought up into a single surface, and that surface is nothing but living beings. It's nothing but faces, really. It's like the whole world has become these millions and millions of faces staring back at you. And this sort of likewise is that incredible box that I was showing you. This is all four sides of it, which you can see again is made up of an incredible number of faces that come together. One of the great artists of the 19th century, Charles Edenshaw, told Franz Boas, he saw a sketch of this and he said it was Raven creating the world. And he tried to sort of explain to Boas, yeah, here's Raven's wing and here's Raven's face. And Boas was like, I really can't figure it out. I'm sorry. But what you see here is a body form that has been flattened and abstracted into this kind of, again, world of faces, but then it's closed in around this deep surface. And here finally, just one last thing, you can see these two objects in situ. This was what the whale house in Klukwan looked like at the end of the 19th century, and the rain screen is still in Klukwan in a little museum now. But you can see the screen. The clan leader would live behind the screen, and he would step out through the screen, so it'd almost be passing through the body or the face of the ancestral spirit figure and emerging out of it. And you can see here that all of these treasured objects are on display, but normally they would be kept in these boxes. So much of the kind of ritual life in Tlingit culture would revolve around pulling these sacred objects out of boxes and laying them out for display, to be worn, to be used. Okay, I'm going to just jump forward here. So in her great ethnography of the Tlingit under Mount St. Elias, the anthropologist Frederica Laguna, she talks about a phrase that she often hears in the context of the fights between shamans and witches. And what she hears is a phrase, someone put his spirit into my sleep. In other words, someone put someone else's spirit into my sleep. And the idea here is that, for instance, if a person is being cursed by a witch and doesn't know who the witch is, then the shaman can perform a rite which conjures up the image of the person who's guilty of afflicting the afflicted person, and then project it into the cursed person's mind during sleep. And sometimes the witch himself can also project an image into the person's mind, or the shaman might himself come to visit somebody in the dream and talk with them and give instructions and warn them and heal them. And there's a few things I wanna already start diving into the language, in part because I'm a big nerd for languages, and particularly I'm a just great lover of the Tlingit language, but also because you can start to see the complexity of the concepts at play here when we think about something like sleep or dreams. So Yakwaheagu is the word that means spirit, and it's one of several words for spirit in Tlingit. And there's two words for spirit in Tlingit, two main words for spirit in Tlingit. There's tuwu, a ka means a person's. Ka tuwu is a person's spirit, but tu literally means inside. So it's like a person's inside. It's again like your spirit understood as this like space inside of you. Then there's this yakwaheagu, which means something like a face that will move back and forth, a face that will move invisibly back and forth. The verb there is to move invisibly or to appear. So already here, this distinction that I was talking about is really present, that you can think about your soul as like this big space full of memories and ideas, or you can think about your soul as this kind of little face that travels around the world and that can be inside of you, or it can leave, or it can go different places. So in this case, someone put someone else's face spirit into their sleep. To go even more granular on the language here, I'm going to just focus in on this part right here. Achtai tut. Ta means sleep in Tlingit. Achtai, that means my sleep. Tu means that same inside, a hollow inside, and then t means you're arriving at something. So in other words, people's souls go into other people's sleep, and sleep has like a hollow cavity, like toot is something you would use. It's a phrase that you would use to talk about like putting something in a sack or putting something in a box. Like there's a great story about a cannibal giant who clubs a young boy and then he's going to eat him and he throws him in a sack. And the storyteller says, "Gweich today." He threw him in a sack. So the image here is almost as if sleep is a kind of envelope or container into which souls can travel and can go and be in. So this little moving face can slip into your sleep container. Now, containers and envelopes are really essential metaphors in Tlingit culture. And this is part of the reason why I showed those images of boxes. The bentwood box is one of the just foundational artistic objects, forms in the culture. It's a site of transformation. It's used to cook food. It's used to store ceremonial regalia. It's constructed in a really amazing way. This box is made from a single plank of wood, which is steam bent. And then all four sides are bent by steam. And then just one side is stitched together, but the other sides are all just one single plank that's been bent. And things can be brought out of concealment from a box. That's a thing that you often hear. So they become these really powerful metaphors for the experience of something being transformed, of something arising out of the depths. And you have to imagine that landscape that I was describing to you, where you've got this dense forest and this deep ocean and like a tiny little beach where people can build their houses. And so everything is like, you're peeking at a deer that you're trying to hunt through a dense network of foliage, or you're out canoeing and you see just, a splash of a salmon before it disappears down into the water. So that kind of experience is so important, both in the lived life up here and also in the metaphor, in the metaphors and in the kind of conceptual thinking of Tlingit culture. It's a kind of peekaboo experience. So dreams seem to participate a little bit in this idea that they slide in and out of this kind of deep hidden world, under the ocean or in the forests. And there's kind of an important corollary to that, which is that they often happen to people who go out into the forest or onto the ocean. In other words, there's a very common theme in Tlingit culture and in a lot of the world's cultures, which is that for people to have important dreams, they have to go out into the wilderness. They have to leave the community. And this is a little bit paradoxical, perhaps, in the sense that the whole point of this talk and the whole point of your course is to talk about dream sharing and dreaming as a communal activity. But in fact, part of that is that for people to really get into the dream zone, to have serious and important dreams, they often have to leave their community and go out into the forest. And so here's an example of that. This is actually an account which I think comes up in my dream sharing article, but I'll run through it really quickly so you see it again, because it's a nice template. It's a very clear one, and we're going to look at some more complex ones in a moment. But this is an account of a Tsimshian shaman, so that's a culture just to the south of here. Basically, the beginning of his initiation as a shaman through a dream that he had when he went out into the forest. When I was a growing child, I knew that I had strange powers. This was why I knew I had different powers from other people. One day, I went up into the hills to gather wood, and it was very cold. There were many other people gathering wood, as it was now winter, and it was in the hills above the village where they were. When I got to the hills, I heard strange noises at the top of the tree which I was cutting. I looked up, and behold, there was a large white owl sitting on the top of the big tree. Then the owl flew down and grasped my head and flew up with me into the sky. Well, it was then that I lost my senses, and it was then I started to dream, and this is what I dreamed. I dreamed that I was now flying way up into the sky, and here I saw a great many strange things, and I knew that it was the owl which was flying me up by grasping my head. Then I suddenly awoke, I came to my senses, and behold, I was lying on the snow with my face downward, and my face had sunk into the snow. I had been away now all day. When I returned to the house of my father, I told him what had happened to me. So he said to me, The reason this has happened to you is that you will be a great shaman, halite. Halite is this word for sort of power in the Tsimshianic languages. Okay, so what to say about this story? The story begins in the village, in the community, and it ends in the village, in the community. So you start there and you come back there. But in the middle, there is this articulation of a relationship between the dream and the wilderness, being in a dream state and being out in nature. And you notice that before that, the kind of dreamlike experience actually happens before he starts to have a dream, you might say, right? He has this animal flies at him and it like knocks him unconscious. And then he says, then I started dreaming. But first he has this encounter with this animal in waking life. And I think what he's describing here a little bit is something like the intensity of your attention when you encounter another living being in a situation where you don't know exactly what that living being is going to do to you out in the forest, for instance. So if you've ever been alone in the forest at night and, you know, every sound starts to sound like it must be a bear or a wolf or something like that, that's sort of what I'm talking about, this just heightened attention. And that heightened attention, interestingly, like rather than making like the adrenaline super rush to his head and make him super alert, basically causes him to pass out and pass over into a dream state. So there's some thing saying here that when you're super locked into attention with other living beings, with the natural world, with animals in particular, that can lead to you dropping into the dream state. So you go out into the wilderness, you have these encounters with animals, and the intensity of that encounter triggers this dream state. And what seems to describe this dream state is this intense feeling that the whole world is alive, that everything is speaking to you and you're speaking to it, and that you're in this kind of locked attention with it, that everything has a claim on your attention the way a wild animal would have a claim on your attention, or an animal would have a claim on your attention as you're walking through the world. There's a wonderful line from Shakespeare, incidentally, from A Midsummer Night's Dream, in which he says something like this. He talks about those of you who know the play, these people are out in the woods all night and they have all these encounters with fairies and people were half donkey and so on and so forth. And then they kind of wake up and they're sort of like, did we dream all of this or did we not? And the Duke of Athens comes and finds them and he just says, kind of to try to dismiss everything that they've experienced, in the night, imagining some fear, how easily is a bush supposed a bear, right? So for Shakespeare, you could say this is the bush to bear phenomenon. Like when you're out in the forest at night, just every bush seems like a bear. But my sense is that in stories like this is not meant to be dismissive. This is meant to be like, it's really important to be in that state where you're feeling, where you know that the bears are there and that behind every bush there is a bear. And once you're in that state, then you're primed for dreaming. You're primed for dreaming. Okay. Where I'm going to go now is to a story, a somewhat more complex story in which the same things are being talked about, but now you can start to see that they really get played with and ramified in a lot of different ways. So this is a story that was told in 1904 by a man named Caudostine, and it was recorded by an anthropologist named John Swanton, who published it in a book called Tlingit Myths and Texts, which is a book that has some problems, but also has just incredibly precious stories in it. And this is an episode in a larger cycle recording the history and movements and migrations of a Tlingit clan. The Quashkikwan is the name of the clan. So here's this little part about dreams. One of these brothers, he's talking about some lazy brother, this group of brothers in the clan. One of these brothers slept too much and became lazy. In olden times, people went hunting with dogs. The 6 brothers went hunting and camped in a house near a mountain. Afterward, they went away from the youngest. One night while he was sleeping, they went away from him hunting because he was lazy. They went away to find out what he could do. They camped away from him for 2 nights. Meanwhile, he slept very soundly. He dreamt that a man came to him and said, "I come to help you. Come down here by the salmon creek and vomit. Immediately he went down to the creek and vomited 4 times. While he was vomiting, he vomited up a salmon bone. This is what makes you lazy, he said to him, the man said to him. This is what you are eating all the time, the salmon people's toilet sticks. You know, in other words, what the salmon people used to clean their butts with. This is what makes you lazy. The one that helped him was the being of the mountain, a Shatwu Kwani, and that wu there, it's that tu shatu, it's that inside again that I keep telling you about. It's the people inside the mountain, spirits inside the mountain. The mountain being said, "Come with me this evening." Immediately he went with him. When they got far up, the doors in the mountain were all opened. Then he went down with him inside. There were rooms inside of the mountain for all things. In the first were grizzly bears, in the next were brown bears, and the next, black bears, in the next mountain sheep. All things were inside. So quite a lot can be unpacked from this dream. First thing is the idea that this man is lazy and that the people abandon him for it. And this is a really common trope in a lot of Northern Native American stories about dreaming, which is that the idea that a seemingly lazy man is actually not being lazy, but rather doing the work of acquiring power through his dreams in sleep. And you see this throughout that whole Na-Dene world I was telling you about, all those languages related to Tlingit. For instance, there's wonderful stories by a storyteller named Catherine Atla, who died in the early 2000s. She was Koyukon from northern Alaska. And in her stories, you know someone is preparing for a medicine journey because she says, this guy is sleeping all the time. So she'll start her story by being like, someone was sleeping all the time. Why was he sleeping so much? And that's all she'll say. But what it means to a listener who knows the tradition and the stories is that he's dreaming the entire story that's about to take place. Like he's dreaming the whole quest he's about to undertake. And then when he wakes up and the story takes place, what you're hearing is both his journey and also an account of all the dreams he's just had, because the dreams and the life he's about to lead are the same thing. But Catherine Atla, the Koyukon storyteller, won't tell you that. All she'll say is, boy, someone was sleeping a lot. Someone just kept sleeping. And that means they're acquiring all the knowledge they need, and in fact, a whole kind of map of this journey that they're about to take. In the case of this Tlingit story, in the dream state, a spirit being enters into the boy, goes into his sleep while he's asleep, and he sort of probes around to discover the reason why he's sleeping so much, right? And in this case, you get this somewhat obscene image of fish bones as these, dirty toilet sticks that are lodged inside of his body. Then he wakes up the boy disgorges these toilet sticks, he vomits them up, and he's now freed, he's now purified, basically, so that he can enter into this congress with the mountain being, and he can pass through all these different screens of the material world to go into these deep spaces. So, again, like there's the surface of the mountain, but once you get in there, there's these huge subterranean chambers, and it's such a beautiful images. All the grizzly bears are asleep in one chamber, and all the black bears are asleep in one chamber, and all the mountain sheep are asleep in one chamber. And it's like the world has these deep underground chambers where the beings of the world rest and sleep. So dreaming is the path by which you go from the kind of surface world into this deep sort of void, or this deep chamber, cavernous world where the aliveness of the world is waiting in repose. One other thing to notice in this story is that one night while he was sleeping, they went away from him hunting because he was lazy. They went away to find out what he could do. They camped away from him for 2 nights, right? So they also have some sense like he's lazy, but maybe he's learning to be a shaman. Like we'll just leave him and see, right? He slept very soundly. He dreamed that a man came to him and said, "You will vomit, blah, blah, blah." Immediately he went down to the creek and vomited 4 times. Nowhere in this story does it say the boy woke up. So there's a clear marker about when the boy falls asleep and starts dreaming. There's not a very clear marker about where he wakes up. It's unclear whether the vomiting takes place while he's still dreaming. Same thing for the visit to the mountains. Is he sleeping or does he wake up? And certainly the story feels profoundly dream-like, right? That, you know, he's traveling into the mountain and he's vomiting up these sticks and the spirit being is talking to him, but we have no marker here that he's awake, that he's awakened. So there's this sense that once you enter into the dream world, you can sort of keep going in it, even perhaps in waking life. And in fact, in the very next scene of this story, the mountain being gives the boy a canoe, which is kind of this like motorboat canoe that will travel on its own locomotion. But in order to travel, it has to be fed animal meat, like it's a carnivore, it's a carnivorous canoe, and you have to feed it animal food, and if you don't, then it will start to eat humans in the canoe. And so he's got to have all this bear meat that he can give to the canoe. And when he finally gets back to his hometown, the canoe turns into a stone, and then he enters into the village, and the storyteller says he looked just as he always did. And so it's almost as if the place where you wake up, or what really matters, is the minute you come back to the village. And then you're like, oh yeah, I was in this magical canoe that was, you know, eating meat, but now it's just a rock. Now it's just, it doesn't move anymore. It's just a stone. The moment of waking up, the real moment of waking up is coming back to the village. And he's changed by this dream and he becomes a powerful hunter. The next line in the story is, then the man who used to sleep so much was ready to hunt. And so then he's able to use this power in a way that then serves the village. And it eventually gets him into trouble down the line because he kind of abuses the power, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. What I'm going to do instead is show you yet another story where you get this procedure by which the powerful state of the dream is negotiated and then not so safely resolved. So in other words, there is a way in which, yeah, you can be in this dream state, you can bring it back to the village, you can wake up, you can be like, I had this dream, I had this set of experiences, I visited the mountain people, now I can use it to become a powerful hunter, I can use it for the community, but it doesn't always work so smoothly. So here's another story, a Tlingit variation on this pattern of an encounter with a powerful animal presence in the dream state with unexpected complications. And this one is told to you by, and here again, I think it's so important to just put some names out here, even though these are in a language that likely most of you have never encountered before. This is a man named Deikinak. We have a photograph from him, which was taken in Sitka in 1904 during the so-called last potlatch of 1904, a famous gathering in 1904. And he was an extraordinary storyteller. Like, this guy is one of the great figures in American literature. Like, he's one of the great masters of 20th century American letters. Didn't know how to read or write, but knew how to tell stories like nobody's business. And he happened to meet this anthropologist, John Swanton, who wrote down some of these stories. And John Swanton was not super strong in Tlingit, but he managed to write down phonetic transcriptions of what he's saying. So we have a fairly good sense, actually, of what the original Tlingit of this storyteller's stories looked like, and it's just masterful. So Deikinak, he's of the Box House Kukhitan of the Kagwantan clan from Sitka. Here he is, looking magnificent in his regalia at the time of this Kagwantan Ku'ik in 1904. And one of the stories he told to Swanton was a story that Swanton titled The Man Who Was Abandoned. And it's going to look, some of it is going to look definitely familiar to the story that I already told you. And interestingly enough, in this version, instead of the hero leaving the town up and leaves the hero. So the way it goes is like this. People living in a long town were suffering from famine. A certain man stayed with his uncle who had 2 wives. The people were very hungry. This man was always sleeping, for he was lazy. When their food was all gone, they started away from the lazy man to camp. But his uncle's wife threw some dried fish into a hole beside the house post for him while she was walking around back of the fire. Then she said to him, I threw a piece of dried fish into the post hole for you. He would put a small piece of this into his mouth. When he took it out, he would go to sleep. He always had his head covered. Then suddenly something said to him, I have come to help you. When he looked, there was nothing there. At once he fell asleep. Hunger was overcoming him. At once he prepared himself for it. What was speaking to him was a small thing running around him. Its teeth were long. Then he took it away. He put it among his rags and he fell asleep again. Then he dreamed that it said to him, put me into the water. When it was getting light, he did so. Where he threw it in, the water smoked. When day was beginning to dawn, he heard the cry of the raven below him. A halibut had drifted ashore there, and the thing that was helping him was right at its heart. So a lot can be unpacked from these lines, but I'm going to just sort of try to point to some of the things that we've been seeing over and over again, which is that this guy has this encounter with a being which knocks him out and he falls asleep, and he's talking to the being in his sleep, but also outside of his sleep, and the being and he are sort of moving in and out of the envelope of sleep, and he seems to be able to communicate with the being like through language in his dream. But then when he wakes up, he can use the being, and this little being, which I sort of imagine as like a little Wolverine, although once when I was giving this talk, someone was like, why do you think it's a Wolverine? And I really had no good answer for that, other than that Wolverines are ferocious creatures with long claws. But he's got some little being that he can then sort of launch out into the world, and the being kills animals for him and brings them to him. But he learns that this being is very sort of powerful and precious, right? And so he's got to be really, really careful about using this creature. In the dream, it communicates to him, he can understand it, he can use it, but in the waking world, it becomes this powerful weapon or tool. To tap into the dream is to tap into this kind of non-human world of power, of aliveness in the forest and the sea, to be able to negotiate this power, to be able to use it for your own purpose. And basically this animal, it becomes this kind of amulet that he uses, that he can squirrel away, and he makes, you guessed it, a special box for it so that he can contain its power, right? So he sticks it in the box during the day, and then when he uses it, he pulls it open and he launches it out, and it kills all these different animals for him. He kills seals and mountain goats and whales, and the thing, which is like this living razor, it's right at the heart of the animal. It's killed the animal and it's like bitten its heart. What happens is he becomes wealthy and prosperous from all of this. The people who abandon him come back with their kind of tail between their legs, being like, oh, we're so sorry, we abandoned you. Like, and he's like, yeah, now I'm a big chief, now I'm very wealthy, now I'm very powerful. And he's got all these slaves and things are going really well for him. And he's always got this sort of secret, powerful dream weapon enclosed in a box. One time, I'll come back to that in a second, he forgets to put it in the box. And this is what happens. One day, a whale came along, moving up and down, and he let his helper go at it. In the morning, the big whale floated up below on the beach. When all were busy with the whale, he forgot his helper. It was hanging to the last piece. When they took up the whale, he forgot it. And because he forgot it, all of the people were destroyed. That's why people say to a lazy man even now, you will be like the man that was abandoned. All the things that had been killed, this is so important, came back to life. Some ran into the water, some into the woods. The people were completely destroyed. So if you fail to observe the rituals that police the border between the wake state and the dream state, they also turn out to be the rituals that police the border between life and death. And so as long as you can control your movements between dreaming and waking, you can keep the dead dead and the living living. But as soon as you lose control of that ability to separate and control dream things and keep them in those dream boxes, then all hell breaks loose. Then basically those boundaries, those carefully negotiated ways in which the power of the animal world has been brought to you through the dream falls apart. So this ritual ability to contain the dream, to find the right vessels for containing the dream, is seen as a total measure of life and death. And just on the subject of life and death, it's worth pointing out that the idiom for falling asleep in Tlingit is sleep killed me, or sleep killed someone. And that's tach ua juk. and it means literally to be killed by sleep. That means you fell asleep. And that's going to be really important for this last story I'm going to talk to you about. And that'll be where I'll kind of end my talk. And this will be where I'm hoping we can I can give you a hint at how all of this comes together, and then we'll open up for discussion at about half past the hour. So this is a story again told by Deki Nok, and this is his great masterpiece story that he told about the history of his own clan, the Kagwantan people, and where he starts that story is with the story of a man whose name is Kakokte, which is a very difficult name to pronounce if you don't have much practice with the Tlingit, but I'll say it one more time, Kakokte. And it starts like this. This Kakokte was a great hunter and used to kill all kinds of things, but now he could get nothing. He's having bad luck with hunting. Then he stopped in a place named the Bay, and he dropped his anchor in the water beside the canoe. Immediately, his steersman went sound asleep, and it's which is, again, that same phrase, but in plural form. They were all killed off by sleep, his steersman. He, however, did not sleep. And I just put the Tlingit in here. He wasn't sleeping. By and by, a small thing began flying around his face, and taking up his paddle, he knocked it down into the canoe, and it made a noise. Tss, tss. Daylight found Kakokte still awake. He took up the bird he had killed and saw that its eyes were swollen up and hung down over its face. Blood was on both sides of its mouth. What he had hit was his own sleep. And by the way, so ta, you might remember, is sleep. Ya is face. So do ya ta'i, the face of his sleep. So it's sleep as a face. It's like sleep is this little bird that he smacked and it died. Then he called to his steersman to awaken him. He did not hear him. Kakokte took up his spear and poked his spearsman with the end of it. As he did not answer, he went over to him and found him dead. Like the sleep bird Kakokte had hit, blood was coming out of his mouth. Then Kakokte went along sadly toward the town with the body. When he gets to the town, Kakokte discovers the horrible thing that he's just witnessed in his canoe is true of the whole town too. He shows up, and because he had knocked down sleep, everyone in the town who was asleep is dead. Not one even small boy was saved. Not even one child saved itself because someone had struck down the spirit of his sleep. Okay, here's where I want to bring us back to this idea of envelope and face, or container and face. Sleep appears in two forms. Sleep appears as this huge envelope that encloses everyone who's sleeping in them. And sleep is also this little bird that's just flying around. But all the sleepers who are asleep, they're inside the bird. So that if you kill the bird, you kill sleep in its bird form, in its little face form, as this little spirit or this little being, then you're going to kill everyone who's trapped inside that big box of sleep, because it's going to crush them. And so in killing the spirit of sleep, you kill everyone who's wrapped in the envelope of sleep. The other thing to notice is that idiom I told you about, to be killed by sleep, means to fall asleep. This is the perfect inversion of it, right? Now, this guy kills, instead of being killed by sleep, he literally kills sleep. And in literally killing sleep, sleep then turns around and literally kills everybody, right? So this thing that was just a metaphor or just an idiom suddenly becomes extremely real, extremely real. To kill sleep is then to actually create this process of killing people. From here, Kakokte is launched upon this whole journey. He has to leave because his people have all died. And he travels to this extraordinary mountain, Mount Fairweather, which is also known as the Land of Spirits. And then he goes up the Alsek River and he meets these new people, and the Athabascans of the interior, and he marries into them, and he gains a lot of wealth, and he comes back to his clans, to his surviving clansmen. I guess there's some who didn't die. And he tries to bring all these these sort of splendid goods that he's gotten from the interior, but they don't recognize him. They think he's a fearsome spirit, and they chase him away. But he meets the Kagwantan people, another clan, and they take him in, and he brings all this wealth. And in bringing all this wealth, he's honored, and he gives a huge feast. He gives a huge potlatch, a ku'ich. And so, in other words, the way this story works is that Kakokte, this man, starts out by destroying the world, by breaking open the spirit, the kind of visionary state, as everyone is trapped in it. Then he has to go out into the wilderness. He has to build up the resources to create a new world, a new community for himself. And then he comes back and he finds people who will take him in, and all the wealth and power that he's gained because of this, he then offers to them. And this sort of becomes the template for the story of how this clan gains its identity, which is that there's a series of catastrophes, and then there are these huge feasts in which people basically commemorate the catastrophes and recover from them through feasting, through giving speeches through each other, through consoling each other, through offering wealth and gifting. And the story ends with the Kagwantan clan literally becoming who it is, because they acquire that name Kagwantan, which means the people of the burnt house, because there's a big feast and boys are playing with fire, and they set fire to some of the house posts, and they become the burnt house people. What I want to emphasize here is that killing sleep sets this whole history of culture in motion. And it's as if, in having killed the figural embodiment of sleep, so sleep as this little being, Kakokte causes this sleep as an envelope to break open and cover the whole world. And what we can see, particularly in this story, is that, like with Kakokte, there is this explicit ritualized enactment of a dream state spreading out, covering the whole world, and then making it possible for new things to be discovered. In this case, for him to leave his community, and it's not an easy thing. It's not like a glorious, like happy, joyous thing, but because of the catastrophe, it opens up this new potential to travel out, to meet the other, to meet these Athabascan people. It wipes away the people you once knew and all the structures of kinship that hold you in place. And then it sets the stage to forge a new world, a new reality, which is charged precisely with that way in which dreams can make thoughts and language real, right? So instead of sleep killing them really becomes sleep killed them. This allows for a new kinship structure to be joined, and in a society where kinship is totally life and meaning, that's a really big change indeed. I am going to, maybe if we have a minute, I'll talk about this in the Q&A, but this is from my amazing collaborator, Shkuye Tim Hall, an incredible researcher who does all of his work on napkins, a member of the inland Tlingit, and a just treasured teacher. But this phrase, nanaki ka'aya u ta, nanaki ka'aya u ta, death lives just across the riverbanks from sleep. And what that might mean is that, not just that there's a parallel, say, between like being asleep and looking like you're dead, but that in sleep you are so close to the liminal boundary between life and death, when everything can be this being that might threaten you, or you might be in contact with, and everything might be a portal into these depths that you can get swallowed up into. In other words, that like you've got these little portals, or you've got these little beings that you meet and you encounter, and when you struggle with them, when you fight with them, when you hunt with them, they can open a door, and suddenly you can plunge into this huge underworld like in the mountains. What I want to suggest to you, and here's where I'm going to end, is that on the one side, there's this experience in Tlingit culture of encounter with a being that leads to plunging into this deep abyss of like intense encounter with the world, that's often represented by being lost in the forest, by being deep in the mountains, by being under the ocean. And then on the flip side, there's the process of coming back with the things that you've gained through that dream portal and giving them to your community. And the way you do that is through the ku'ich, this potlatch, this big feast. There's a lot to say about ku'ich, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, except to say that basically what happens is you commemorate the trials of your ancestors by bringing out sacred objects that you make in order to bring a lot to sort of make visible the experiences, these kinds of dream or vision experiences that your ancestors have had. And this is some of those objects which are called adu of the Kiksadi. And you can imagine that each one of these has a story like Kakaukte in them. And actually, the sleep bird was an atu of one of the clans up near where Kakaukte was. There was a sleep bird image like this, which I've not been able to find an image of. But each of these represents an experience like that. And what happens is your opposites in the kinship structure, the people who are not of your clan, but rather your in-laws, and I can talk a little bit more about what that means if people are curious, but just as shorthand, people who are not of your clan, but of a different clan, you commission them to make this hat or this blanket, and they bring it to you and they say, this is what your ancestors went through. And you pay them for that. You give them all kinds of riches and splendors, and you say, thank you for this. And now we have our ancestors with us, and we put it on, and it's like we're having that experience. We're going deep into that void again, where our ancestors have been. But then we take it off, and what we have is a symbol, a face, a representation, and it's safe. It's something that you can safely control and contain the power. And so you create a feasting situation in which your kin, your family, your relatives, your village helps you to create a way that you can access and plunge into this powerful dream state when you need it, when you need to be back in that dream state, when you need to summon it for its power to defend your community, to hunt, to bring about a kind of altered state of mind, to go into a trance. But there's a way in which it can also then be contained like in a box. I mean, and literally these objects are put in a box and kept safely. And so ritual feasting community becomes the way that the power of the dream is ready to hand, but kept in a safe space. And the key here is you don't just turn it into a symbol that never becomes the thing anymore. That's just a dead symbol. When you put this on, you are meant to be able to feel or have contact with that dream state. And when people have the atu, these objects, these symbolic objects put on them in ceremony, they'll say, it's not me wearing this, it's my ancestors. And the idea there is to say, they're all coming down. They're all coming down, and those experiences are right here underneath this blanket. But when you take it off, it's like all the difficulty, all the danger of being lost in there is lifted from you. And your community helps you do that, And so it becomes a way of being able to encounter the intensity of dreams without being lost in them forever. And that's, I think, where I'm gonna stop for now. But thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for bearing with me as we went through the complexity of this. And I am really happy to answer any questions, to talk both about this tradition in particular or about some of the others that you've been thinking about and working on. So, thank you.